Hi everyone, Stepan here. In today's video I'm going to continue the series on the Queen's Gambit accepted with the most straightforward way for white to fight it, which is e4, mostly known as the central variation, but recently it's been known as the Sadoleto variation. Central variation because it takes up the center, so that's easier to remember. So what are we looking at? After d4, d5, c4, the Queen's Gambit, black accepts the Queen's Gambit. And now the whole idea for black is, well, I have an extra pawn, white will have to waste time to recapture it, and once white establishes his broad center in any way, I'm going to strike at it with the moves c5 or e5 and break open the center, and basically once white has wasted time to regain the pawn and I have wasted time to break up his newly expanded center, the position is going to be equal because both sides are going to have 5 pawns like this, everything else is going to be liquidated, it's going to be equal, or black is going to be better. That's what black is saying. And white is saying, oh, well, he took my pawn, I'm going to regain the pawn and have the broad center, and then I'm going to keep my center secure. So that's what white is trying to do. Now, what we are going to be looking at in the next two videos, pawn to e3 and knight f3, are far more solid and less concrete. e4, the central variation, is well, much more ambitious. So e4 simply questions the whole black strategy and claims huge central space, and if white can manage to get in either e5 or d5 unpunished, then he will have much more space, much more central control, and most importantly, the black knights will always have to step forward carefully because any advance could chase them away, and if the advance has already happened, then the knights don't even have their most natural squares. So e4 in its nature is a very attacking variation because, for example, if e5 happens, then the natural defender of the h7 square is gone and the b1 h7 diagonal is open. So that's one attacking team. So if you want to play aggressively against the Queen's Gambit accepted, then e4 is what you should be doing, in my opinion. Now, one more thing. If black doesn't liquidate his c7 pawn quickly, if he doesn't strike at the center, then once white recaptures his pawn, then there's going to be annoying pressure down the c file as well, which is semi-open for white. So that's another theme to bear in mind. Okay, now what can black do about that? Well, there are a couple of options. You can play in Alekhine style with knight f6, which is going to, if you know the Alekhine defense, or if you play e4, or sorry, Alekhine, if you're English speaking, then the teams are going to be almost identical. The knight c6, which resembles the Nimzovich defense a lot, here it's called the modern defense. I would just call it the Nimzovich system if knight f6 is the Alekhine system, which is again highly provocative. And then we're going to be looking at e5, which is the main move, just trying to punish the fact that white hasn't played knight f3, and then c5 and b5. And if you haven't seen the introductory video to the Queen's Gambit accepted, please do. I've actually changed my mind since yesterday as to which variation I like best. Okay. So let's start with the main line. That's just simplest to remember. Not the simplest variation to remember, but it's simplest to go through the main line first. Okay, so black plays e5. Now what does this do? Well, firstly, it challenges the center straight away. If white should, for example, capture, then this is simply equal. It's even slightly better for black, in my opinion. After bishop c4, knight e5, the bishop drops back somewhere, and black has perfect development. So after e5, that's really not a viable option. d5 also sort of relinquishes central control. Now it can be played, but after knight f6, and for example knight c3, then c6 undermines this center, bishop takes c4, you can play bishop b4, and I mean, it's not bad for white, but this is what black is trying to do to a broad center. He's trying to overextend it. So in a sense, this e5 variation is going to be quite similar to the Grunfeld defense, It's just that you're starting to put pressure on d4 with your e5 pawn and your bishop is not fianchettoed. But the idea is the same. You're trying to provoke white forward and you're trying to break open the center. So d5 would kind of be going into black's hands because it's very easy to play c6 afterwards. So against e5, white simply plays the delayed knight f3, threatening to take a pawn and saying, well, there's not much you can do about it. So black, and this is the good part now, has limited options, or fairly limited options. Now, if you don't do anything, white will capture with the knight and simply be two pawns, simply be a pawn up after he takes here as well. So black can either take on d4 or gain a tempo with bishop b4 check. I actually prefer bishop b4 check, which is a sideline. Now here white has two options. Knight f to d2 is not good because you relinquish central control, and then if knight f to d2, then simply pawn takes, or even queen takes, just keeping your c4 pawn as well. So that would be good. So after bishop b4 check, he can play knight c3 or bishop d2. Knight c3 is considered to be the main line. Now e d4, knight d4, and knight e7. Knight e7 is a pattern that white uses against the Alekhine or the Alekhine that you want to prevent. And also this happens in the Grunfeld for white. White plays knight f to e2, so that if bishop g4 happens, you can play f3, thus controlling d4 some more. In this case, white wants to keep control over d5. So if at any point bishop g5 happens, then you can just play f6, also stopping e5, controlling d5. So knight e7, bishop takes on c4. Now the material is equal, and knight b to c6. Bishop to e3 defends the knight, castles, and this I think is fairly pleasant for black. I mean, he has a 3-2 pawn majority on the queen side, white has a 4-3 on the king side, which is a bit harder to utilize. White, of course, has more space, more piece activity. The development is actually equal after white castles, and black, for example, plays bishop somewhere. So this is okay. And after bishop b4, if white plays bishop to d2, then you exchange. Knight b takes d2 is less common than knight f takes, actually, because you want the c3 square for your knight. But I think it's much easier to play knight b takes. And now e takes d4 and bishop takes c4. And again, this should be, I think, a fairly easy position for black. Just remember that you play knight c6 and play normal moves. c5 is really not good because after castles, something like knight c6, rook c1, and there's tons of pressure on c5 already. If you play something like b6, then bishop d5. So for example, knight g7, bishop b5, let's say bishop to g4, and now rook takes c5, and everything starts falling apart. So yeah, bishop b4 is an okay move. Just remember that in this position you continue with knight c6 and live with the fact that this pawn may be captured, but I mean, that's your extra pawn, so you can give it up. Okay, so that's the sideline bishop b4 check. By far more popular is e takes d4, simply exchanging straight away. And after bishop takes c4, you again have your extra pawn on d5. So for the moment, black has 7 pawns, white has 6. Now you're not going to be keeping this pawn, and let me just show you. Well, don't be greedy in this position. If, for example, you say, well, I'm going to keep my pawn, I play c5, then you actually lose straight away to knight e5. It's not like plus a million, it's plus 1, but for white, but knight e5 is a very strong move. There's pressure on f7, which you have to react to. If you start with something like knight c6, then bishop f7. So you basically have to play either bishop e6 or allow knight h6, bishop h6, and then bishop f7. So bishop e6 is your only move. And now bishop takes e6, f takes e6, queen h5 check. And this is not pleasant. This is just a bad position. Everything is falling apart. g6, of course, fails to knight g6. So after bishop takes c4, you don't have the option of playing c5, so you play knight c6, defending the pawn for the moment with the knight white castles. And again, now bishop e6 is the move you want to play. You want to get rid of this pressure on f7. I know it sounds, well, kind of bad to put your f-pawn on e6, but if you ever play the Semislav in the I don't remember the name of the line, but bishop e6, f6 is common. So here white has two options. Bishop takes e6 is a weird line for black, or I should say an uncomfortable line for black, because after takes and f takes and queen b3 putting pressure, queen d7 defending, and let's say queen takes b7, now the material is equal, the white queen is misplaced, black has managed to develop some of his pieces while white is yet to develop his queen side. And actually after b3 castles bishop b2, the black king is fairly safe. You could even consider something like e5. So this seems visually unappealing, but it's actually good for black. White does have the c4 square, he has the f5 square, and it's not that white is worse, but you have this passed pawn and you can actually challenge both squares. So yeah, I would be happy playing this if I saw it before. Otherwise, I would be scared. But the main line is bishop b5, pinning the knight and trying to release, trying to exert more pressure on d4. So now bishop c5, you defend your pawn. b4. Now this shouldn't really be taken with the bishop because then the d4 pawn drops, so bishop b6, and now a4. And in this line, white gains a ton of space, and I can understand why white likes playing this way. So we have to play a6, bishop c6, bc6, a5, bishop a7, and now bishop develops to b2, and you don't have a way to defend your pawn anymore. So after knight f6, bishop takes, you don't have to take there, you can just take on e4, and again black has 6 pawns, white has 5, but your extra pawn is really nothing. After queen d1 takes, rook takes, something like knight d4, and bishop here, it's equal. But the fact that it's equal gives me great confidence in this move e5. So if this is the final position out of the opening, you reach on move 14 or move 16, then I'm happy. So after e5, that's the position you are trying to reach. Okay, now let's have a look at the Alekhine system. Excuse me. So the Alekhine system is the move knight f6, which very similar to the Alekhine defense or the Alekhine defense. So e5, of course, knight d5. So this is the Alekhine defense, just for some reason there's a pawn here instead of here. So okay, bishop takes c4, knight b6, bishop to b3. Bishop d3 is also possible, let me just show you that quickly, but after knight c6, bishop e3, there's this annoying move knight b4, and I'm not a fan of this, because after bishop e4, black gets to play f5, and now ef6, ef6 gives black, well, two very good bishops, a very good queen, both knights are active. I don't know, it's supposed to be better for white, but I would enjoy playing black here, especially because, well, let's say knight f3, and now you can set up a blockade on d5 and, well, try to just play with your two bishops, castle eventually, and have good pressure. So if I'm white, I'm playing bishop b3. White plays knight c6, and now here's the pattern from the Alekhine defense, and this I would love you to remember if you're going to play knight f6, and also if you play d4 and the queen's gambit, then this you have to know against knight f6. So in the Alekhine you want to play knight e2 to stop bishop g4, or against the Alekhine. If you play knight f3, then bishop g4 can happen. So here the main move is knight e2 as well. If you play knight f3, there's a forced draw both sides have to be aware of. So of course you want to punish knight f3 with bishop g4. That's the point. But now white has an extremely beautiful move, knight g5. And of course if you don't take the queen, then you would have to play bishop e6, and then you would be lost anyway. So you have to take the queen, bishop takes d1, but now this is a forced draw, bishop f7, king d7, bishop e6, and you just repeat into a draw. So after knight c6, if white plays knight f3, well then you could go for bishop g4 as black if you're happy with the draw. If not, well then go for bishop g4 anyway, because there's nothing better. So white should play knight e2. Again, if white, if you are playing a grandmaster, then play knight f3 and hope for bishop g4. Okay, now since bishop g4 would be met with f3, black plays bishop f5, and black wants to play a Caro-Kann with the pawn on c7, striking at the center later on with the move c5. So ideas like knight e7, knight d5, c5. Knight b to c3, e6, white castles, queen to d7, normal development, bishop to e3, and now, again, you could play in several different ways. This is one of the ways. The main move here is actually castles queenside, so you can do that. Arguably, the king is safer here because, well, you don't have a knight on f6 and there's a pawn on e5. Okay, but rook c1, king b8, something like knight a4, pawn to f6, undermining the center, and this is pleasant. If black knows what he's doing, this is pleasant. Again, white has more space and should be equal. Okay, now knight c6, which is called the modern defense, is the variation I like least. First, I'm going to show you a queen sack line for white, which you have to know if you play knight c6, and then I'm going to show you the main line. The queen sack line starts with bishop to e3, and after knight f6, well, most moves are actually natural, they are not forced. So knight c3 defending the pawn, and now black plays the move e5, which is also the most natural move. Now again, taking queen takes queen, rook takes queen, knight e5, defending the c4 pawn. So d5 natural, knight a5, the most natural move, defending the pawn. Knight f3 is normal, attacking e5, and bishop d6 is again normal. So not forced, but the most natural move. So now, if two humans are playing, well, why not win the knight on a5? That seems obvious to me. So queen a4. This actually loses the queen if you take the knight, but white should have enough compensation. So bishop d7, queen takes knight, and now pawn to a6. Now, of course, with these two bishops, you can see that the queen has absolutely no scope, and that b6 would win the queen. So the reason why you play a6 first is because if you play b6 immediately, then queen a6. Okay, so bishop takes c4, b6, and now queen takes a6, rook takes a6, bishop takes a6. In this position, black is supposed to be equal. The material is, so both sides have a rook, both sides have a knight. Let's do it like this. Both sides have a bishop, both sides have a bishop. So it's rook and knight versus queen, and white has a pawn for that. So material is actually perfectly level. But white is able to create a passed pawn on the a file, already supported by the beautiful bishop on e3 and by the rook on a1. I would want to be white here, but okay, let's actually see the live book. One game played from this position. It was Karpov-Lothier, and it was a draw. It was in 1996, so Karpov was strong. Karpov was playing white. So I think it's an okay line. Of course, if black doesn't know it, then it's going to be a great surprise. Okay, but against knight c6, the main move is knight f3, and that's far less exciting. Bishop g4, of course, you use the fact that the knight went to f3. And now this may surprise you, d5. So maybe knight c6 is okay, because the moves don't come naturally, in my opinion. Sorry. I don't think it's natural to play d5 here, because knight e5 double attacks the knight. Now, in this position also, the next move may surprise you. I mean, if a human who doesn't know this variation is playing, I'm expecting bishop e2. But the move is bishop f4, attacking the knight. And now actually taking is much better for white, which again surprises me. f3, knight g6, and queen a4 check is just much better, because queen d7 takes. White has this very solid pawn structure in the center. White has the two bishops. Of course, white has all of his pieces out already once knight c3 is played. So, and of course he could, after retreating the bishop, just take this pawn, because let's say here and b5 and a4, and if a6 takes, you don't have c6. So you're going to get this pawn. So after bishop f4, not bishop takes f3, but knight g6, attacking the bishop. The bishop travels back to e3, and now we play knight f6. Knight c3, white could also capture straight away, but knight c3 is better. And now e5, you have to fight for central control. And this is why I don't like this Nimzovich type system with knight c6, because you have to play aggressively, you have to seek activity on every turn. And that's, I don't like to be forced into having to seek activity. Okay, so e5, bishop c4, a6, bishop e2, bishop d6. This sort of Benoni bishop instead of the pawn, I don't like it. Knight d2, bishop d7, declining the trade. And the position is okay. It's not that black is worse or anything, but I just don't find it pleasant. Queen e7, rook to c1, and now b5 expanding. So again, you can play this. It's going to surprise white, but I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, now c5, which used to be my favorite move, is no longer my favorite move. I'm going to show you why. Okay, so after c5, which is the most natural, just breaking the center straight away, there are a couple of options. dc5, let's just say that is not good because of queen takes, king takes, and e6 exclam. And now with bishop c4, then of course bishop c5, and if bishop e3 defending the pawn, then knight f6, bishop c4, knight e4, and you're picking up the other pawn as well, unless b4 is played, in which case you play a5. So pleasant. So against c5, there are basically two moves, knight f3 and d5. Knight f3 is slightly inferior, so cd4. Now you can see the similarity to e5. It's just that you're trading off your flank pawn. So queen d4, knight d4, and this is just completely equal. Bishop takes c4, knight c6. This is the most boring variation in the world. Pawn structure symmetrical, development equal, dreadful. So if you're playing for a win with white, don't play this. The way to challenge c5 is to play d5. Now, there's the main move, which I don't like anymore, and there's a sideline, which I would recommend. The main move is knight f6. Has been played around 300 times. e6, which I would recommend, has been played around 150 times. Now, why don't I like knight f6? Well, after knight f6, knight c3, you play b5 here, and after b5, this pawn cannot be taken. If knight takes b5, then queen a5, knight c3, knight takes e4 is just winning for black. Much better for black. However, after b5, there are a couple of options for white which are extremely dangerous for black. The best move is bishop f4. And now you are forced into a variation that's simply no good for black. I mean, I tried many things. Whatever I tried, it's simply no good. You have to play queen a5. It's just the best move. And now the bishop draws back to d2. Okay, and now you have two options. You can play e5, which has never been played. The engine recommends it. And no, actually, excuse me, it has been played twice. It's not this line. You can play e5, and after d takes e6, bishop takes e6, e5, you actually play knight c6, giving up a knight. And now ef6, castles queenside. And this is just mental. This has never been played. Black is supposed to be equal, but I just don't want to play this. I don't know how to prove compensation for a knight with all of the pawns in front of my king having moved away. So you can try this. You can put this on an engine. Let me turn it on. Okay, yeah, now it says +1 for white, but my laptop is... I didn't keep it running. Eventually it says black is okay. Now... After bishop d2, the main move is b4, and this is objectively worse for black. So after b4, we have e5, and bc3, bishop takes c3, queen a6. And now what? ef6, b3, ton of pressure, bishop e7, bishop takes c4. This is just a disgusting position for black. Another option, if after b5 white wants to be even more aggressive, he can simply play e5 on move 4, where we sort of transpose after b4. It's just that queen a5 hasn't been played. E takes f6, bc3. F takes e7 is actually not that good because bishop takes e7, bc3. And castles give black a much safer king. So after bc3, white just plays bc3 and ef6, bishop c4, bishop d6. Again, it's a very messy position for black. This I just don't want to play. So, to avoid all of that, after c5, d5, I would recommend the very quiet move e6. And this is a very nice move. Of course, if the pawn is taken, you get to exchange queens, stop white from castling, and play bishop e6 defending c4. Let me just show you that. So here, takes, takes, and bishop e6. Perfect, extra pawn, safe. So after e6, white cannot take. If white advances, then you take. Pawn up, thank you. So white has to play bishop c4. So you're already limiting his options. And now, you simply trade off, or you can go into a more complicated line, which I wouldn't recommend, with knight f6, and after knight c3, ed, knight d, bishop d, bishop e7. This is actually the main way to play, and should be equal. Let's say knight f3, castles kingside, queen b6, bishop e3. Yeah, this pawn shouldn't be taken because rook b1 and you lose material. So yeah, this should be equal. But I think it's much more interesting to exchange straight away. And after e d5, bishop takes d5 to just play bishop d6. Now again, there's this Benoni bishop, but for the moment you're stopping e5, which I should just mention could be played. Let me just remember what the refutation is. I actually don't remember. I saw this in one game. Okay, the game is Kochka Zolt Nemet Zoltan, 2200 players. I don't know why I remembered this now. Okay, I'm going to turn on the engine to see how to refute this. Okay, it's actually better for white, so the engine likes this move. It doesn't take, it plays bishop c7. And after, wait, what happens if takes? Sorry for this, I just... okay. Yeah, and the queen is loose. Okay, sorry. So that's the point. You can actually play e5. So if e5, you play bishop c7, losing a tempo, the pawn advanced, and you don't have knight f6, but it's going to be okay. Okay, but the more natural move is knight f3, supporting e5. And now you play knight f6. And in this position, well, e5 would allow knight takes d5. So bishop g5, pinning the knight, h6 unpinning, bishop to h4, and castles kingside. So again, I think this is a very pleasant position. If at any point e5 happens while the king is still on e1, you can play queen a5 because the bishop is not on the diagonal anymore. So I sort of like this. I wouldn't say black is better, I would say black is equal, but I like it more than knight f6. But overall, here's my favorite variation of all. b5, the Greco variation. So why do I like this? I think it's insanely fun, and I think it's impossible for white to find all of these moves over the board in 90 minutes. Okay, now watch what happens. So b5 is the natural move that defends the pawn. This is a pattern you can see in many defenses. And of course, the natural way to fight that is to play a4. Now, the difference is that in most defenses, you always have a rook hanging on a8, and you think, well, I cannot play a6, c6, a takes, knight b5, blah, blah, blah. Well, here you can. You actually give up a rook. So here's what happens. You play c6, defending the pawn, a b5, c b5, knight c3, and a6. Now, if a strong player who doesn't know the variation is playing white, he's probably thinking, oh, what an idiot, I just play knight b5. And if you're playing black and you instantly recapture, and he takes your rook, then after bishop b7 a tempo, he's going to start thinking, well, this guy knows what he's doing, he just gave up an exchange, what do I do? So, the rook goes back to a1, and you play this quiet move e6. Okay, now, Black is an exchange down, but what does black have for the moment? Firstly, this bishop is a monster, much better, of course, than the h1 rook. It's also much better than the a1 rook. So for the moment, dynamic compensation is here. Maybe in the end game, if you reach it, you'll have trouble because you're in exchange down. For now, you're not material down. Okay. Secondly, black's king is safer. Why? Because you have all of these pieces around your king and there are no open diagonals to your king. There are open diagonals to the white king. The most important thing, you have this 2-1, which if you reach an endgame and exchange down, could be enough compensation. Now, white has a couple of options. There's a move that has never been played, which I like. It doesn't seem human, but I like it for white because it sort of dampens black's activity. The move that's preferred, theoretically, is f3. Now that simply defends the e4 pawn, weakens some more squares, and black has an amazing response. Now watch what happens. f5. Now if white doesn't know this, he's just going to lose unless he's a great player. So now how do you defend? You could play queen e2, that's not good. So you have to take ef5. Now knight c6. And you don't care about the pawn, you just want to attack. Knight e2, white has to start developing. Knight g2 e7, you don't take again. You would love this to happen, because that would mean he's wasting more time. Let's say white plays g4, which could be the best move. Knight d5, look at your pieces. Look at this. White has, well, what does white have? White actually has a pawn for this, and then exchange. But let's say bishop g2, normal move. Now bishop b4, check. King f2, e takes f5. Let's say g takes f5. Queen h4, check. King g1, and you castle kingside. Look at this position. This is insane. I would just love to play this. This b5 is my favorite move now. Okay, now let's say instead of f3, which is the main move, white plays knight f3, giving up the pawn. Now this saves time, develops pieces, so it's way more sensible. So bishop takes. Now black has a pawn for the exchange. So that's already something. Bishop e2, knight f6, white castles. Fine, your king is safe. Bishop b4 doesn't do much, and now b3. Okay, after b3, white of course wants to start putting pressure here. So let's say bishop c3, let's say rook a2 and castles. This should be equal. White is going to liquidate these pawns. Black is going to have a bit more activity. And eventually this pawn is going to drop, so black is still going to have a pawn for the exchange. It's going to be a tougher endgame for black. Let's see what the engine says. It says +1 for white if bc4 is played. Okay. Yeah, instead of bishop c3, which is a move I was looking at, it also says castles or knight d5. So this is going to be trickier, but yeah, easier for white to play than the f3 line. And here's the engine move. The engine actually wants to play e5 here, which I can understand because it stops black from developing easily and also saves the pawn. Saves the pawn with the gain of space. So what does black do? Black plays bishop b4, and after bishop d2 you actually exchange. You play knight e7 looking at d5 and f5, and after queen a5 you decline the trade. The queen comes into b6, you castle, white continues knight e2. And this I think is pleasant for black. Even though the engine thinks this is the best way for white to play, obviously there's rook a7 coming and stuff. I think the d5 square, the weak d4 pawn, and the 2-1 pawn majority on the queen side is enough to compensate for the exchange. So yeah, b5 is my favorite move now. I would play it if I played the Queen's Gambit Accepted, which I am going to be playing. So yeah, I hope you liked the video. Hope you got something out of this. Tomorrow we are going to continue with pawn to e3, which is going to be less active for white than this. And yeah, let me know what you think. And of course, stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye, see you tomorrow.